Hi, class. Today I want to talk about what we call classic argument organization. This is a way to structure your argumentative essays. Most of the essays you're going to be writing in college and all of the essays you're going to be writing in my composition class will be argumentative essays. So this is good to know for your entire college careers. So in high school, a lot of times or most of the times, what they will do is they will teach you what's called the 5 paragraph essay. So we all know what this is. There's an intro, there's 3 body paragraphs, and there's a conclusion. Usually you put your thesis as the last sentence of the introduction. You have 3 main points, and each of those main points are your 3 body paragraphs. So the reason they do this in high school is because it makes for an easy way to have a standard where everyone follows the same thing and it's easy to grade. And it's a way to show that you can write a reasonably decent argumentative essay. The problem with the 5 paragraph essay structure is that in real life, no one ever writes 5 paragraph essays. If you read any essay in a magazine or even on a blog or basically anywhere in the real world, nobody actually writes this way. So the reason I bring this up is because this classic argument organization that I'm going to talk about does have 5 elements to it, but it is definitely not the 5 paragraph essay. Don't think of this as a step-by-step process. It's a guideline. So think about the 5 things I'm going to talk about here are all things that should be included in an argumentative essay. The order that you present them in may differ. Some of these things may overlap as well. But your paper should include these 5 things. Now you've got introduction at the beginning and conclusion at the end. It's hard to get around that. The other things are background information, development and support. This is what the body is, and then counter arguments. So I'm just going to go through these 5 things with you here. The introduction, a paragraph or so that basically introduces the subject of the essay and the thesis of the essay. So what's the essay about and what's the argument you're making in this essay? That's the main thing you want to do in an introduction. The other thing you want to do in an introduction is try to evoke the reader's interest somehow, right? Get them wanting to read the rest of the essay. So I'm going to go through a few introduction strategies here. One is using a relevant anecdote, so telling a story, right? That sets up what the essay is about. Human beings like stories, like we like to read stories, we like narratives. So that can be a really good way to pull your reader in, right? So if I'm writing about, let's say, parking issues on campus is the subject of my essay. So my anecdote might be something like, you drive in to campus and you go to the one parking lot and there's no spaces there. So then you have to go around the corner to here and then there's no spots there. And then, you end up walking a mile to class because you had to park so far away. Something like that, right? Make it into an anecdote, make it into a story. Sometimes a relevant description can work really well for certain essays. So if you're writing about an environmental problem, maybe, or if you're writing about poverty, something like that, if you describe the setting, right? Here's what the, polluted stream looks like, right? There's garbage everywhere. No animals, something like that. Or here's what poverty looks like. Here's a house that someone lives in and they don't have running water and, etc. So sometimes description can work well. Sometimes a relevant quotation works well. So usually by, some kind of famous or prominent figure in that related to whatever you're talking about, right? So such and such says blah, 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 and you can jump from that quotation. Statement of a problem can work well, right? Here's, make it clear what the issue is. Here's the problem I want to look at, parking on campus, pollution in Saucony Creek, whatever. Sometimes you can make an analogy that works really well. So one that I think of that back when the Iraq War was starting, like 20 years ago now, a lot of people would make the analogy. People who are trying to argue against the war would say, if we get into a war with Iraq, it'll end up being just like Vietnam, right? So that's a good example of trying to use an analogy to make an argument. Also, a provocative statement, something that's going to make your reader want to hear more. Oh, what do you mean by that exactly? These can be easier said than done, but if you can find a really good one, it can be very effective. One of the most famous ones is by Oscar Wilde, who you may know as the author of Importance of Being Earnest or A Picture of Dorian Gray. But he has a famous quote where he says, what is it? Does life imitate art does art imitate life or does life imitate art, right? That's a great example of a provocative statement because you're not exactly sure what he means by it, right? But you want to hear more. What exactly do you mean by that? Obviously, art can imitate life. How would light imitate art? And what he goes on to talk about in that particular essay is the way that, art influences the way we live our lives. Okay, so that's the first one. The next one is background information. So just again, keep this in mind. You want to make sure that you give your reader enough information so that they know what you're talking about in your essay, so that they can understand the subject you're talking about, the argument you're making. So include any information that the reader needs to know to understand what you're talking about. There's not one way to do this or one place to put it. Sometimes you might be able to work all the background you need into your introduction. Sometimes you may do it a little bit at a time as needed throughout the body of the essay. Or maybe you devote a whole paragraph to it. Here's the background you need and throw it all out there. However you want to do it, just make sure it's in there. Make sure your reader knows enough, understands enough about the subject that they can follow what you're trying to argue. All right, development and support is the third part. This is what people usually call the body. I like to use the term development and support because it's more descriptive. You're developing the argument you've made, you're supporting the argument you've made. So this is where you put in those, concrete examples, all that objective evidence, analogies, precedents, statistics, facts, anecdotes, expert opinions, all that stuff that you use to support your argument. Again, don't get caught in that 5-paragraph structure, right? There's no topic that is, or it's rare that there's going to be a topic where there's exactly 3 main points to make about it, right? And each main point doesn't necessarily need to be 1 paragraph, right? You might spend 3 paragraphs making 1 point, right? But it has different elements to it. You might have 4 main points or 5 main points, depending on the length of your essay. So again, don't get caught in that, 5-paragraph, 3 main point structure. So one thing that I like to say about this part of the essay is analyze, don't summarize, or at least don't just summarize. So when you're presenting information, when you're presenting that objective evidence to support your argument, statistics or whatever, don't just present the information, don't just give a quote, don't just give a statistic, don't just give an example. Always follow it up with analysis, right? Keep bringing it back to your thesis. Here's how this relates to the argument I'm making, right? Here's the statistic. Here's why the statistic is significant in relation to the argument I'm making, right? So, follow it up. Don't just present stuff and make your reader do the work. Show your reader how this relates to what you're trying to argue here. Show them why you're giving them this information, why you're giving them this statistic, why you're using this quotation from an expert. On that note, generally speaking, and you might you might break this rule occasionally, but usually don't want to end a paragraph with a quotation or a statistic or an example. Just remember, always follow up on it. Always bring it back to the thesis. So let's say you have your main points, however many there are. How do you organize them? Sometimes that can be an issue. So here's some organization strategies, and again, every essay is different, so different things will work with different essays. One that I like that I find very useful is the emphatic approach. Basically, this is begin with weaker arguments and end with stronger ones. That way, you end with emphasis. You end with emphatically on your strongest points. So let's, you have 4 main points, maybe put them in order, right? This one's kind of weaker, so I'll start with this, and then the stronger, and then I'll build up, and then I'll end with the real, strongest point, really driving it home for my reader. Sometimes chronological can work if you're telling a story. Certainly, chronological, here's the beginning of the story, here's the end. For a narrative essay. Sometimes if you're looking at the historical development of a topic, chronological can work well, right? The technology was here 20 years ago, and here's where it is now, something like that. Sometimes you can even use space as an organizing principle. So if you're writing about, say, poverty, right? Maybe you write about here's the nice neighborhood, and then you move into, move further in here, and you see where the poverty develops. There's a famous essay called Fabio's Home, written a long time ago in Life magazine, that uses this strategy, and it's about poverty in Rio de Janeiro, and it uses it very effectively. This guy's a journalist, and he travels to Rio. He's staying, oceanside in this really swanky hotel, and he's eating like $20 steaks, and everything's fancy. And then he starts driving inland and seeing the favelas, and he sees worse poverty than he's ever seen in his life, and it's really effective. The spatial organization sets up the contrast there. If you find that you have a lot of general arguments and more specific ones, better to start general and then get more specific. If you're writing about something philosophical or scientific, something complicated, better to start simple, get your readers comfortable with the topic, and then move forward toward the more complex. So those are just some strategies. Like I said, different things work with different papers, but those are some possible strategies to organize your main points. All right, number 4, don't sleep on this one, counter arguments. If you've ever watched a debate, you'll notice that the people in the debate, if they're good at debating, they know 2 things, right? They know what they want to say on the issue or issues, right? They have that down. But the other thing that they have down is, if they're good at debating, they already know what their opponent's going to say on the issue, and they have some kind of answer or response for it, right? So do the same thing in your essays. Always consider counter arguments. Yes, you're arguing this. What do the people who disagree with you say, right? What are the counter arguments to your argument? If you just ignore them, it's going to make your argument look a lot weaker, right? You've got to engage with the counters, right? So I know people disagree with me on this. The people who disagree with me say such and such, and here's why they're wrong, right? Here's why their arguments are flawed, right? So bring up what are the counter arguments, and then you've also got to address them. Show why they're flawed. Show why your argument is superior. But don't leave that out in your essay. That's a really important part of argument. For conclusions, there's basically one big rule with conclusions. The point of a conclusion is just to wrap things up. So don't bring any new support into your conclusion. all of the support for your thesis, counter arguments, background, all that stuff has already been done by the time you get to the conclusion. All you're doing in the conclusion is wrapping things up. So here are some strategies for conclusion that can work pretty well. One that I like a lot, and again, different things work well for different topics, but broadening the scale can work well. So maybe I've been writing about parking issues on KU's campus. So maybe in my conclusion, I say something like, I've addressed here the problems with parking at KU, but colleges throughout the country are having issues with parking. So see how I've broadened the scale there, right? I've written this essay on this specific thing, but it brings up a broader issue, right? Consider what questions remain, what's left to be done. Sometimes you've treated your topic thoroughly, right? But there are other kind of adjacent or side things that come up with the argument you're making. Speculating about the future of an issue can be a very effective conclusion, right? Especially if you're writing about, say, something like technological changes, right? So, social media has affected people's socialization in such and such way. And then when you get to the conclusion, you might say, now imagine what future technologies will come and how those will affect us socially, right? Sometimes you can use an effective quote or an effective anecdote to conclude. Really, all of the things that I pointed out as introduction strategies can also work as conclusion strategies, right? So a nice story that kind of wraps up what you've been trying to say, or a quotation. And then I also put on here, review your main points. And while that seems really basic and simplistic, it's really not the worst way to end an essay. If you can just say, so in summary, what I've said here is this, this, and this, right? Just kind of narrow it all down to, here's what I want you to take away from my argument here. So, reviewing your main points is not a terrible way to conclude an essay, even if it doesn't sound that exciting. So while I'm talking about essay structure, I want to real quickly talk about paragraph structure, because this is an analogy that I find helpful. But think of a paragraph as being structured much like an essay, and that it contains a beginning, middle, and an end, right? Just like every essay has a central thesis that everything in the essay revolves around, every paragraph has what we call a topic sentence that the entire paragraph revolves around. A lot of times when I'm, conferencing and doing revision with students in their essays, I'll say, what's your topic sentence, or make your topic sentences stronger, right? So every paragraph should start off with, here's what the topic is of this paragraph, and then everything in that paragraph revolves around it. One main point or one topic sentence per paragraph. And then develop that topic sentence with support within the paragraph, right? Explanations, examples, quotations. So just like every essay has, an intro within the thesis, a body that supports it, a conclusion that wraps it up, every paragraph is like that too. Topic sentence, here's the support and development of that topic sentence, and then here's the sentence that wraps it up. Just some quick advice on sentences and transitions within your paragraphs. It's generally good to vary the length and complexity of your sentences within a paragraph. Keeps it from becoming choppy or monotonous. If you have too many short, simple sentences, it comes out choppy, like da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da. Not much fun to read. However, if you go the other way and have too many, long, complicated sentence on top of long, complicated sentence, that can be difficult for your readers to follow as well. So use shorter sentences, longer sentences, simple subject-verb structures, more complex structures. Use compound sentences and or but. Throw in dashes and semicolons here and there if you want to. And then some quick advice on transitions. Use transitional words and phrases liberally. Use them frequently. Therefore, however, for example, right? These words exist to make transitions. They show how your ideas relate to one another. So use these terms. And then the other set of advice I have for transitions is use your keywords consistently in your text. Maintain a set vocabulary of key concepts. A lot of times in published essays, they'll even have keywords listed in journal articles. So having this set vocabulary keeps your transitions more tightly linked, right? I have the word here, I have the same word again here. It also puts emphasis on the terms that you think are important in your essay. That is it.